okay, destroyed them, burned the books, the whole thing. Took out all the colleges. College professors were made to be coal miners. They destroyed everything in the social order that they could create the Cultural Revolution and begin again. In that process, they made men into women. And Lin Biao had, okay, so they were called the Army of Hairy Crabs in Chinese. That's what it translates to.
It's like grass, mud, horse. Okay.
Okay, exactly. But these were the army of individuals. Okay, so Lin Biao was not only the propaganda minister, he was the chief of internal security. All right. And so he had the situation of everybody spying on everybody else inside China. And he developed all of these conduits, these mechanisms for individuals to report on their neighbors that would then feed up chain to the top guys.
Which we see coming here. They already have you could.
Yeah. Okay. And so Lin Biao developed this whole mechanism. It's all a complete package. You have to have the whole package work. In order for all of it to work, it needs to have every bit of it to work. But anyway, so he developed all of that. He was a propaganda minister. He brought out all the redefinitions in the language, and he created these group of people through the manipulation of language and through their schooling that thought they were transgenders. And they were called the Army of the Hairy Crabs. Now, he used them as spies and homosexual prostitutes, right? This was pre-surgery. There was not a lot of that. And there was not very, they introduced sexual liberation to the point where they could put women into positions of power and put them into the military, but they had very little success in making women into men in their process. They tried that in like end of 66 through in the middle of 67, then abandoned it and thereafter concentrated on the homosexual population within China and converting them over to transgenders. He did this through propaganda, through all kinds of mind control, through the deprivation.
You're talking about making men into women.
Correct. And
they couldn't do it the other way around very well. They did it the men into women for the most part. Yeah, which is what we're seeing here, I think.
Right. And he did it through the school system because the parents were encouraged to surrender their children to the state, right? The whole, all of you're worshiping the state thing. Anyway, he eventually turned them into assassins. Now, what's really interesting to me and how I came into this whole understanding was that in 1967, I think it was, my father was in the War College for the U.S. Army. And some of his homework, I was bored. There's just nothing to do as a kid on these military bases and stuff. So I read a lot of the material he had. And they had briefings about these Chinese assassins, about the legions of hairy crabs that were actually being used as assassins political within country. So it wasn't like they were unleashing these people around the world. It was more like
it was in country.
Right, to control the population in country. And in that briefing that they had, that my father had, was this very astute fellow that had gone through and translated a bunch of the Chinese literature about the process itself. And, there's all this history about how he got the literature, none of which is pertinent at the moment. But anyway, he's translating it, and he translated some key phrases from a colonel that had experience with Lin Biao's army. And he said that these individuals were easy. So there was no esprit de corps, there was no company bonding, there was no any of that kind of stuff, right? In training even, wow. but you had
kind of a free-form ethic.
Correct. And
kind of outside the network, outside the fabric of our normal thinking ethically.
And you hit right on it, okay? Because what he said was they had all been infected with, the Chinese called this the ghost disease, or Lin's ghost disease, or the invisible illness. Okay.
I've heard of that.
Okay, and so, but they said when you confronted the ghost disease within the individual, you, the person doing the confronting, had better be wary that these people instantly reacted with violence because their minds had been so fractured and shattered, there was no place for that mind to retreat. Therefore, it had to act out. So you see this now. Note that most of the people in Antifa are trans, okay?
Yeah.
And you see this even with them extending that trans ideology to the idea of fascism. If you become if they're accusing you of being a fascist and you somehow remove in that interaction that idea from them, they're truly lost, because they define themselves in their interaction as an anti-fascist, just as the trans people identify themselves in their interaction with the rest of the world as the victim of the rest of the world ganging up on them for this reason that's in their head, not in ours.
So this sounds like a version of MK Ultra mind control, but unlike MK Ultra, where they give you a place to retreat to, they give you an altar that allows you to function in society until they activate you. This doesn't have that. Is that kind of what we're getting at here?
Correct. And the reason that this doesn't have that, and the reason that this is not like MK Ultra, is because Lin Biao's big insight was the introduction of hormone therapy. Okay, so there was no hormone therapy at all in China prior to 1965, and then all of a sudden, China is getting into the hormone production business like you would not believe. Synthetic hormones of all different kinds. That's why they discovered that trying to turn women into men did not work, because synthetic testosterone is not like the real thing, and the way that they had done it, as I've been told from a chemist, left a I can't remember the wording he used to explain it, but basically it left a long chain molecule form of the hormone as a residual that was very, very, very difficult for the female body to integrate, to actually uptake, right? But it couldn't get rid of it either. And it caused real severe mental problems really quick. I think that any synthetic testosterone, because of the nature that it's an oil, basically, and I won't go into the details of that part of the biochemistry, but women don't do well with synthetic oil injections. Men don't really either.
Well, and they don't do, interesting in the whole history. And I've just been part of the anti-aging medicine community. And I got to tell you, that's been a big argument, big fight. They kept trying to prove that all biologic hormones were bad for women, but it turned out it was just the synthetics. The Women's Health Initiative, it was all about one synthetic, and it wasn't all that bad compared to radiation and other things, but they've been pushing these things for a long time, and it's not, so that did come here. It's the death by chemists.
Yeah. And it's a war on all of us, right? Continuously. And it's because these Khazarians are driven to think they need to control. That's really the impetus for everything that we're all suffering now. And I personally I'm not of the opinion that any of us would give a rat's ass about the Khazarians if they stopped being the buttheads that they are. Right.
Sure. It's not about, again, it's not about what's in your blood. It's about what's in your behavior.
Correct.
Yeah.
But
they don't seem to be able to exit from that.
That's really interesting. And so here's the thing. Okay, so if we read into literature that goes from Sanskrit up to the Jain, which is a small sub-religion in India, in northern India primarily, and we go from there and we read other literature in Russian and then come back down and we read literature in Hebrew, we get this impression of this group called the El, that are the actual gods referenced in the Bible, and they're just space aliens. But these people were intent on mental manipulation of their human captives. So in the actual translation of the Torah, which is the Old Testament, okay, so it's bound into the New Testament, and it forms the major corpus of the Bible. If we actually translate that, we get and do it word for word from the Hebrew, we get an entirely different picture than what is presented in the Christian Bibles. In that, we don't get 10 commandments, we get 613. Okay, these 613 commandments can be divided into about, let's just say somewhere less than a third go to the idea of how to prepare burnt offerings. Okay, the burnt offerings are the burning of the fats of the abdomen from